They say the worst pain is when strangers laugh at you, but I learned the truth the day my own family decided to destroy me. My uncle looked at me with cold eyes and shouted, "Your future is a joke," as he poured a jug of water on my computer while I was still writing my final exam paper. My heart was shaking, my hands frozen, but before I could even react, my aunt laughed and said, "Stop pretending you're smart, you're just a burden in this house." Imagine standing there, books ruined, computer dead, dreams crushed, while the people who were supposed to protect you were enjoying your humiliation. That moment could have been the end of me, but instead it became the beginning of something they never expected. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Scarlett Hayes, and this is not just a story about struggle. This is about how I turned every insult into my fuel. I remember that night clearly, the sound of water dripping from my soaked computer, the papers torn apart, and my uncle leaving the room with a proud smile as if he had won some battle against me. My aunt whispered to him, "Now she will finally stop wasting time." They thought I was broken, but deep inside me something was burning, something they had never seen before. I felt like crying, I felt like screaming, but all I did was sit in the corner of my room staring at the destroyed pieces of my hard work. I knew I had no one to call for help, my parents were gone, and the only relatives I had were the same people who wanted to crush my dreams. That night I made a promise to myself, a promise that I would never allow their voices to define who I am. I kept replaying their words in my head, "Your future is a joke," and instead of feeling weaker, I began to feel stronger. I thought to myself, if my future is a joke, then one day I will make the world laugh at their blindness. I had nothing left, no working computer, no exam papers, no encouragement, but I still had something they could never take away from me, my determination. I decided I would rebuild everything from scratch, even if it took me years. I had to start with small steps, because at that time I had no money, no resources, and no one to support me. My aunt controlled every coin that entered the house, and she would purposely hide things from me just to make my life harder. I remember trying to borrow books from the library secretly, hiding them in my bag so no one would ask questions. Many nights I studied under the dim light of my phone flashlight because they would switch off the main lights early to stop me from reading. The more they tried to stop me, the more I learned to adapt. At first, I didn't even know what exactly I was chasing, I just knew I couldn't give up. Slowly, I started to realize I was not only fighting for a career, I was fighting for my dignity, for my right to exist without shame. I began to write in hidden notebooks, keeping my thoughts alive, practicing essays, solving problems, and training my mind to become sharper than ever. Every insult they threw at me became an exercise, every negative word became motivation. I had no idea how or when, but I believed that one day these pages of my hidden notebooks would turn into something bigger than myself. I remember the first time I scored well in a small test at school after the incident. It was not even a huge achievement, but to me it felt like winning a war. My classmates had no idea what I was going through at home. They only saw a girl who looked tired all the time but kept showing up. What they did not see were the nights I cried silently, the mornings when my stomach was empty because my aunt said there was no food left, or the afternoons when my uncle mocked me for wasting time on books instead of helping with chores. I kept everything inside, wearing a smile outside, because I knew one day the truth would show itself. The anger inside me became like fuel, and I had to learn how to use it properly. I decided to build myself quietly, like a soldier in training, waiting for the right moment. Even when teachers gave me extra work, I didn't complain because I knew knowledge was my only escape. I remember telling myself every morning, "Scarlett, today you have to prove them wrong, not tomorrow, not next year, but today." And that daily whisper to myself became a habit that slowly built a wall of strength inside me. Yes, I failed sometimes. Yes, I broke down many nights. But each time I picked myself up, I felt stronger. And now when I look back, I realize the real reason they tried to crush me was because they were afraid of what I could become. People who fear your light will always try to keep you in the dark, and my uncle and aunt were the perfect example of that. They didn't want me to shine because my success would highlight their failures. That's when I realized my fight was not just about education or career, it was about survival, about showing the world that I am more than the labels they gave me. I didn't know then how far this road would take me, but but I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of my story, and no matter how broken I looked from the outside, inside I was building an unshakable foundation. After that night, when my uncle poured water on my computer and my aunt laughed at my dreams, I could feel something shifting inside me. It was not just pain anymore. It was a strange kind of fire that refused to go out no matter how many times life tried to crush it. I woke up the next morning with swollen eyes because I had cried silently for hours, but along with the sadness, there was a powerful decision in my heart. I was not going to quit. I knew my uncle and aunt wanted me to live like a shadow in their house, someone invisible, someone dependent, someone who would never rise beyond the limits they created for me. But I also knew deep down that if I kept following their rules, my entire life would become exactly what they called it, a joke. I told myself, Scarlett, if they destroyed your computer, then you will train your mind to become your strongest weapon. A computer can break, but a sharp mind never dies. That single thought gave me strength. I started to spend more hours in the library after school, pretending I was working on group assignments so my aunt would not question me. In reality, I was secretly reading about people who had built themselves from nothing. I read about inventors, leaders, writers, and entrepreneurs who had gone through worse situations but still created history. Their stories whispered to me that my humiliation could become my weapon, just like theirs had become their ladder to success. I began to imagine my own future in those pages. Every time I saw a quote about strength or success, I wrote it in my secret notebook. That notebook slowly became my treasure, my private collection of hope. One night, when I was hiding under my blanket, I wrote in big letters, "I will not be their burden, I will be their regret." From that day, whenever my aunt called me a burden, I silently smiled, because I knew I was transforming that word into a future they could not even dream of. Life at home did not become easier. In fact, it got harder. My uncle started locking away the TV remote, the Wi-Fi password, and even the fridge sometimes just to make me feel small. My aunt complained about every little thing I did, from how I washed the dishes to how I folded my clothes. But something inside me had changed. I had stopped caring about their approval. Instead, I began to see every insult as fuel. If they said I was useless, I studied harder. If they said I was wasting time, I practiced my skills longer. Slowly, their words became like background noise. My focus turned into a shield that protected me from their negativity. I realized that the real enemy was not my uncle or aunt. It was the voice inside me that sometimes whispered, maybe they are right. That inner voice was dangerous, and I had to kill it. So I started training my thoughts the same way I trained my brain. Every morning before school, I stood in front of the mirror and told myself, Scarlett, you are not weak. You are not stupid. You are not a burden. You are becoming stronger every single day. At first it felt silly, but with time those words became my armor. In school, things also began to shift. Teachers started noticing that I asked more questions, that I was more engaged than before. My friends sometimes teased me for being too serious, but I didn't mind because I knew why I was doing it. Knowledge was my escape route, my secret weapon, my ticket to freedom. Still, the journey was not smooth. There were days when I doubted myself, days when I thought maybe my aunt was right, maybe all this effort was useless. But then I remembered the wet computer, the destroyed exam paper, the laughter on their faces, and instantly my doubts turned into determination. I could not allow that moment to be the last chapter of my life. I had to write a new one. Sometimes, I stayed late in the library until the staff had to tell me to leave. I walked home with heavy books in my bag, feeling like each step was a step away from their cruelty and a step toward my own destiny. The nights were the hardest because at home I was forced to act like nothing was happening. I couldn't let them see my fire, otherwise they would try harder to kill it. So I wore a mask, pretending to be quiet and obedient, while inside I was building an empire of thoughts. What I didn't realize at that time was that this double life was training me for the bigger challenges ahead. It was teaching me patience, resilience, and focus. Looking back now, I understand that if I hadn't gone through that humiliation, I would have never discovered the strength hidden inside me. But at that time, all I knew was that I had to survive one day at a time. And in that survival, I was slowly becoming unstoppable. Little did I know, the first small wins were about to come, and with them, a new chapter of my life was waiting to unfold. The first time I felt a small win was when I participated in a school writing contest that nobody believed I could even enter. I remember sitting at the back of the class while the teacher announced it, and I heard some students whisper that only the bright kids would join. For a moment, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong in that category. But then my mind flashed back to that night, the water dripping off my computer, my aunt's cruel smile, my uncle's cold words, and suddenly I felt a rush of fire in my chest. I signed my name on the list without hesitation. When I walked home that day, I couldn't stop thinking about how I would make it work. I had no computer to type my essay, no one to guide me, and barely any time because of house chores. But I also knew that challenges were now my new normal. That night, after finishing the dishes and cleaning the living room, I sneaked into my room with a pencil and my secret notebook. I began writing by hand, pouring my heart onto the pages, not worrying about perfect grammar or style, just writing from my soul. The theme of the contest was the power of belief, and it felt almost as if the universe had chosen it for me. I wrote about a girl who was told she was worthless, but discovered that her true value was hidden inside her courage. I was not just writing a story, I was writing my own truth disguised as fiction. Days later, I submitted it to my teacher, who looked surprised because she never thought I would even try. Weeks passed, and when the results were finally announced, I was shocked. I didn't win first place, but I came in third. To the world, that may have been a small achievement, but to me, it felt like standing on the top of a mountain. When I saw my name on that certificate, I knew for the first time that I was capable of more than what my uncle and aunt believed. I walked home that day holding the paper tightly against my chest, hiding it inside my bag so they wouldn't see it and mock me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, smiling in the dark, because that small piece of recognition was my proof I was not a burden. I was becoming something greater. After that, I started looking for more opportunities, small contests, projects, anything that could sharpen my skills and give me confidence. My teachers started noticing my effort and sometimes gave me books or encouraged me to participate in debates. I still remember my first debate. I was trembling when I walked onto the stage, but as soon as I spoke the first line, I felt all my pain and anger turning into power. My voice shook at first, but then it grew stronger with every sentence, as if I was no longer speaking for myself, but for every girl who had ever been told she was not enough. I didn't win that debate, but I walked off the stage feeling like a fighter who had just discovered her weapon. Each small step became a building block, and slowly my confidence began to grow. And then one day, something unexpected happened. A teacher asked me to share my story with the class. At first, I wanted to lie and say something ordinary, but then I realized this was my chance to turn my humiliation into my weapon. So I told them. I told them about the night my uncle poured water on my computer, how my aunt called me a burden, how I hid books under my bed and studied with a flashlight. The class went silent. No one laughed, no one mocked. Instead, some of them clapped, and a few even told me later that I inspired them. That was the moment I understood the true power of my story. It was not just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been pushed down. It was about showing them that no matter how dark life gets, the fire inside you can light the way. I also realized something else. If people were listening to my story in a classroom, maybe one day they would listen on a bigger stage, maybe even on platforms where thousands could hear. That thought scared me, but it also excited me. I started imagining a future where my voice could travel further than my pain ever did. And in the middle of those thoughts, one day when I was practicing my speech for class, I looked at my friend and said, "Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more." We both laughed, but deep inside I felt a strange spark, like one day I would really say those words to a bigger audience. Maybe one day I would even ask people to comment where they were watching from, just to see how far my story had reached. Back then, it was just a dream, but dreams have a strange way of turning into reality if you believe hard enough. That small joke with my friend planted a seed in my mind. My story didn't have to stay hidden, it could grow wings. With every small achievement, I was proving to myself that I was not the weak girl they wanted me to be. I was building a version of Scarlet that was unbreakable. But with every new step I took, the pressure at home also grew heavier. My uncle noticed I was spending more time at school, my aunt started accusing me of ignoring housework, and their taunts became sharper. What they didn't realize was that the more they pushed me down, the higher I was preparing to rise. Those small wins in school were just the beginning, and deep inside, I knew bigger challenges were waiting for me. Winning third place in that writing contest and stepping onto the debate stage had given me something I had never experienced before, a taste of possibility. But possibility is a dangerous thing when you live in a house where your every move is watched and criticized. The more I pushed myself at school, the more my uncle and aunt tightened their grip at home, as if they could sense I was slipping out of their control. My aunt began giving me extra chores on the exact days I had important assignments, and my uncle started mocking me in front of neighbors, calling me the dreamer who will never wake up. Each insult was like poison, but I had trained myself to turn poison into medicine. I still carried my secret notebook everywhere, scribbling down quotes, ideas, and even pieces of speeches I imagined giving one day. It became my silent companion, the only one who knew the truth of my battles. At school, though, my small wins began stacking up. Teachers began trusting me with responsibilities like organizing group projects or helping weaker students. Some classmates who used to ignore me now asked for my notes. Slowly, I felt myself transforming from invisible to valuable, and that shift was addictive. Still, at home, I could never celebrate. The day I brought home my certificate for the writing contest, I kept it hidden under my mattress. I couldn't risk them seeing it, because I knew they would tear it up just to remind me that nothing I achieved mattered under their roof. This double life was exhausting, pretending to be a failure at home while secretly building myself into something stronger. There were nights I questioned whether it was worth it, whether I should just give in and live quietly the way they wanted. But then I would hear their voices echoing in my head. Burden, joke, useless, and those words would light the fire inside me all over again. Around this time, I got my first chance to participate in a regional-level competition. My English teacher had secretly recommended me, and when she told me about it, my heart raced. It was bigger than anything I had ever done. But the challenge was enormous. I needed to prepare a speech, arrange travel, and convince my aunt and uncle to let me go without them suspecting why. I spent nights rehearsing in whispers, holding my phone as a fake microphone, standing in front of the mirror until my voice grew stronger and clearer. I wrote and rewrote my speech until I could say it in my sleep. The night before the competition, I pretended I had to stay with a classmate for group study. My aunt frowned, my uncle growled, but somehow, maybe because they were too tired to argue, they allowed it. That small victory felt like I had already won half the battle. The next day, standing backstage at the competition, I thought my legs would give out. My hands were shaking, and for a moment I wondered if my uncle had been right all along. Maybe my future really was a joke. But then I remembered the water pouring over my computer, the laughter of my aunt, and I told myself, Scarlett, you are not here by accident. You are here because you fought for it. When my name was called, I walked onto that stage with a pounding heart but steady steps. As I spoke, I could feel the audience connecting with me, not because I was perfect, but because I was real. I told them about the power of belief, about turning pain into strength, without directly telling my story, but with every word carrying my truth. When I finished, there was silence for a moment, and then applause. I didn't win first place, but I received an honorable mention, and for the first time a stranger came up to me and said, "Your words touched me." That sentence hit me harder than any award. On the way home, I cried silently in the bus, not out of sadness, but because I realized something. My voice had power. It could reach beyond walls, beyond cruelty, beyond the limits of my home. That day, for the first time, I believed that my story was not just my own. The moment I stepped back into the house, though, reality struck again. My aunt was waiting with a list of chores, and my uncle asked why I was late. I lied and said we had extra classes. They shook their heads and muttered insults, but I didn't let it hurt me the way it used to. Because now I had a secret they didn't know. I had seen a glimpse of my future, and it was brighter than they could imagine. From then on, I threw myself into every opportunity I could find. I started volunteering to help with school events, stayed after hours to practice, and even began writing small pieces for the school newsletter. Each activity made me feel like I was carving a path toward something bigger. Still, their voices never stopped. One evening, when I came home late after helping organize a debate competition, my uncle shouted, "Stop pretending you are smart. Do you think these things will put food on the table? You're just wasting your time." My aunt added with a bitter smile, "One day, you'll come crawling back to us, begging for help." That night, instead of crying, I laughed quietly under my blanket because I knew something they didn't. I was no longer begging for their approval. I was building a life that would prove them wrong. And yet, even as I grew stronger, the weight of their negativity sometimes dragged me down. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when I wished I had someone to share my victories with. But then I would remind myself, the world doesn't clap for you at the beginning, it claps for you at the end. And I hadn't reached my end yet. I was still climbing, still fighting, still transforming. That realization gave me peace. Looking back now, I see that Section 3 was about my small wins, but Section 4 was the real test, the stage where I faced bigger challenges, where I learned to carry my victories in silence while surviving in an environment designed to break me. It was the part of my journey where my mind began to sharpen like a blade, ready for the battles still to come. The honorable mention at the regional competition should have been a moment of pride, but because I had to hide it like a stolen treasure, it also became a heavy secret on my shoulders. I walked around the house acting normal, carrying water, cleaning the floor, pretending to be the quiet burden they thought I was, while inside my heart was still beating to the sound of that audience's applause. I knew I was changing, and that scared my uncle and aunt more than they would ever admit. They started finding new ways to crush me. My uncle began calling me lazy if I dared to sit with a book for too long, and my aunt started checking my bag to see what I brought home from school. They thought if they controlled my surroundings, they could control my dreams. But what they didn't know was that my dreams no longer lived in the pages of books or the walls of a classroom. My dreams were in my mind, in my voice, and in my determination, and no one could lock those away. Still, the pressure kept increasing. Some nights, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of their constant negativity. I remember one particular evening when I returned from school after staying late to help my teacher organize a workshop. As soon as I walked in, my aunt grabbed me by the arm and hissed, "Do you think you're better than us just because you stay late? You're nothing, Scarlett, nothing but a burden." My uncle laughed from the couch and added, "Mark my words, she'll never make it. She'll be back here crying when the world spits her out." Their voices were sharp, but instead of cutting me, they forged me. I wanted to scream back, but I knew it would be useless. Instead, I looked at them silently, nodded like an obedient child, and went to my room. But when the door closed behind me, I whispered to myself, "One day, I'll make you eat those words." That whisper became my fuel for the next few months. I worked harder than ever, joining every contest, writing every essay, practicing every speech. Some days I lost, some days I won, but every single day I grew. My teachers noticed, my classmates noticed, but at home nothing changed. My aunt still mocked me, my uncle still insulted me, and I still hid every certificate under my mattress. It was a lonely journey, but it was shaping me into something unbreakable. The biggest challenge came when I was selected to represent my school in an inter-school competition that was going to be recorded and uploaded online. For the first time, my voice would not just reach a room full of people, it would reach the internet, where anyone could hear it. When my teacher told me, I felt both excited and terrified. This was bigger than anything I had faced, and I knew the stakes were high. I practiced day and night, sometimes in the bathroom whispering my speech to the tiles, sometimes walking back and forth in the schoolyard pretending I was already on stage. The more I practiced, the more confident I felt. But at home, things were getting worse. My uncle noticed I was distracted and accused me of plotting something useless. My aunt increased the chores, almost as if she sensed I was preparing for something. The night before the competition, she threw a pile of clothes on my bed and said, "Don't think your little school activities will save you. Life will crush you, and I'll be here to watch." I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel hurt. I felt pity, because I realized something powerful. Her words were no longer chains around me, they were proof that I was becoming everything she could never be. The next morning, I walked onto that stage with my heart racing. Cameras were set up, lights were bright, and students from different schools filled the auditorium. My legs were shaking, but as soon as I began speaking, everything else disappeared. I talked about courage, about resilience, about believing in yourself when no one else does. I wasn't just giving a speech, I was telling my own story without naming names. When I finished, there was thunderous applause. Later, when the video was uploaded online, I couldn't believe the comments. People I had never met were saying things like, "This girl is inspiring," and her words gave me hope. For the first time in my life, strangers were cheering for me while my own family tried to silence me. That irony made me smile, but it also came with a new challenge. My uncle eventually heard about the video from a neighbor, and when he confronted me, his face was red with anger. "So you think you're famous now?" he barked. "You think people will care about your nonsense? Let me tell you, they'll forget you tomorrow, but you'll always be a burden in this house." My aunt stood beside him, arms crossed, smirking. I didn't reply. I just walked away because I knew arguing would only feed their bitterness. But inside, I was glowing. They could deny my achievements all they wanted, but the world outside had seen me, and that could never be erased. That period was the hardest and also the most transformative. The challenges grew bigger, the insults grew louder, but so did my strength. Every time I stood on a stage, every time I saw my words touch someone, I felt a piece of the chains around me breaking. I began to believe that one day I wouldn't just inspire a classroom or an auditorium, I would inspire people across the world. But before that dream could come true, I had to survive the storm at home, and that storm was about to get worse. My uncle and aunt's hatred was reaching a boiling point, and I could sense it. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew I had to be ready. Section 4 had shown me what bigger challenges looked like, but Section 5 was about to teach me what it meant to fight back not just with words, but with unshakable willpower. When my uncle found out about the video from the inter-school competition, I could feel the atmosphere in the house turning even colder. He barely looked at me without anger in his eyes, and my aunt started speaking to me with an extra edge of cruelty, as if the fact that strangers were praising me was a personal insult to her. The air in that house became so heavy that every step I took felt like walking on glass. But what they didn't realize was that their hatred was no longer crushing me, it was sharpening me. Every harsh word reminded me that I had already stepped into a world larger than their living room, a world where my voice mattered. I began to secretly visit the library computers to check the video comments. I still remember the first time I read a message that said, "I don't know who this girl is, but her courage gave me hope today." I stared at the screen for minutes, my hands shaking, because I had never imagined that someone far away could feel my words so deeply. That one comment was worth more than all the insults I had ever received at home. It was the proof that I was not invisible. The small spark of recognition I received from strangers ignited something bigger inside me, a vision. I began to dream of creating content, of speaking not just in competitions, but on platforms where anyone could listen, platforms where no uncle or aunt could mute me. The idea scared me, because I had no resources, no equipment, and no support. But I also remembered something I had promised myself the night my computer was destroyed, that I would never let their cruelty decide my destiny. So I began to plan quietly. I borrowed books on communication, read articles about public speaking, and even observed how famous speakers carried themselves. At night, I whispered lines to myself, pretending I was speaking into a camera that didn't exist yet. My secret notebook now filled with not only quotes and thoughts, but also plans for the future, ideas for videos, topics I wanted to talk about, and even sketches of what my first channel could look like. Of course, I couldn't let anyone at home find out. My aunt grew suspicious when she saw me writing more often, and she once snatched my notebook from my hands. My heart nearly stopped, but luckily she didn't read it. She only flipped through the pages and tossed it back, muttering, "Waste of paper." That was the closest I had come to being exposed, and it made me more careful. I began hiding the notebook in different places every day, sometimes under the mattress, sometimes inside the lining of my school bag. The fear of being discovered was real, but the fire to build something greater was stronger. Then came another turning point. One of my teachers, the same one who had encouraged me for competitions, called me after class and said, "Scarlett, you have something special in your voice. Have you ever thought of sharing your story online? People need to hear you." My eyes widened because it felt like she had read my secret thoughts. I didn't tell her about my notebook, but I nodded slowly. She gave me access to the school's old recording camera, saying I could use it after hours if I wanted. That moment felt like destiny opening a door for me. I began staying late at school, pretending to work on assignments, but secretly I was recording myself. The videos were rough, shaky, and unedited, but every time I spoke into that camera, I felt like I was reclaiming pieces of myself. I talked about courage, about never giving up, about finding strength in pain, always keeping it general, but every word was soaked in my own experience. When I uploaded my very first video on a borrowed account, I didn't expect anything. But within a week, a handful of people commented. Some said thank you, others said they needed to hear those words. I cried quietly in the bathroom stall at school because I couldn't cry at home. I knew then that this was my breakthrough, the moment when humiliation had officially become my weapon. At home, life only got worse. My uncle started accusing me of neglecting responsibilities, and my aunt complained about every breath I took. They still had no idea what I was secretly building. Sometimes I wanted to scream, "You call me a burden, but people out there call me an inspiration." But I stayed quiet because I knew silence was my shield until I was strong enough to reveal the truth. Meanwhile, my small online presence began to grow. Slowly, more comments came, more people subscribed, and some even messaged me saying they wanted to hear more of my journey. Every time I read those words, I felt like I was escaping the prison of that house, brick by brick. It wasn't just about recognition anymore, it was about responsibility. I realized that my story didn't belong to me alone. It belonged to everyone who felt broken, everyone who had been told they were worthless. And I was determined to carry that responsibility with strength. There was one night when I almost gave up. I had just returned from school when my uncle yelled at me for leaving the gate open, something I hadn't even done. He threw my bag across the room and told me I was a failure who would never make it outside these walls. I picked up my bag silently, went to my room, and locked the door. For the first time in months, tears poured out uncontrollably. I felt like the walls were closing in, like maybe I was fooling myself with dreams of freedom. But then I picked up my notebook, opened it to the first page where I had written, "I will not be their burden, I will be their regret," and I felt my spirit returning. I wiped my tears and whispered, "Scarlett, you've come too far to quit now." That night, I recorded another video, speaking directly from my pain, and when I uploaded it, it became the most watched video I had ever posted. The comments poured in, and one person even wrote, "Scarlett, your story feels like mine. Because of you, I will not give up." Reading that, I realized that even if I was still trapped inside that house physically, my voice had already escaped. My words were flying across cities, across people's lives, carrying strength I didn't even know I had. Section 6 was the breakthrough. It was the point where my secret turned into light, where the humiliation my uncle and aunt tried to bury me with became the soil in which my new future was growing. I still couldn't see the full shape of that future, but I knew it was real. And soon, very soon, the world and my family would see it too. The night I uploaded that video, which touched the lives of strangers, was the same night I realized my journey had crossed a point of no return. I was no longer just Scarlett Hayes, the quiet girl trapped in her uncle's house. I was becoming Scarlett, the voice that people waited to hear, the girl whose story reminded them not to give up. My uncle and aunt still saw me as a burden, but the outside world was beginning to see me as something entirely different, and that was the greatest victory of all. At home, nothing had improved. My uncle yelled louder, my aunt tightened her grip, and their words became harsher than ever, as if they sensed that their control was slipping away. But I had changed. Their voices no longer pierced me the way they once did. Each time they mocked me, I thought of the people online who wrote, "Thank you, Scarlett, you gave me courage today," and suddenly their insults felt small, almost powerless. My secret was growing bigger than their cruelty. Weeks turned into months, and with every video I uploaded, my confidence grew. I started to experiment with sharing pieces of my story more openly, not the full truth yet, but hints of it, talking about resilience, about fighting against those closest to you, about turning humiliation into strength. The response was overwhelming. People didn't just listen, they connected. Some said my words gave them hope in dark times, others said they finally felt less alone. I realized then that pain has a strange power. When you share it, it becomes someone else's light. My secret notebook, once filled with angry promises and hidden dreams, now became my script book. I wrote down everything I wanted to say, every story I wanted to share, and every dream I wanted to chase. And then, one day, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. A small but respected platform reached out to me after seeing one of my videos. They invited me to speak at an event where people from different cities would gather to hear inspiring voices. When I read the message, my hands trembled. It felt unreal. This was the opportunity that could finally lift me beyond the limits of my aunt's kitchen or my uncle's living room. But it was also terrifying because it meant stepping into the light fully, without hiding. After all, if the event was recorded and shared widely, my uncle and aunt would know everything. For 2 nights, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake imagining their faces when they would hear my story. Would they explode in rage? Would they kick me out? Or would they finally realize that their burden had become something greater than their bitterness? Finally, I decided. I was done hiding. The world deserved to hear the truth, and I deserved to live it. On the day of the event, I walked onto the stage with my heart pounding harder than ever before. The lights blinded me for a second, and I almost froze. But then I remembered that ruined computer, the dripping water, my aunt's cruel smile, and my uncle's hateful laugh, and suddenly my fear vanished. I spoke, not just about resilience, not just about belief, but about my life. I told them how my own family called me a joke, how they tried to destroy my dreams, how I studied with a flashlight under a blanket, and how every insult became the fuel that carried me to that very stage. The silence in the hall was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. And when I finished, the applause was thunderous, louder than anything I had ever heard. Some people stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. For the first time, I felt the weight of my past lifting off my shoulders. That applause was not just for my words. It was for my survival, for my courage, for my decision to never give up. When the video of that speech went online, it spread faster than anything I had done before. Messages poured in from people across the country, even from other countries, saying things like, "Scarlett, your story is my story too, and because of you, I will keep fighting." For the first time in my life, I saw proof that my pain had turned into a weapon powerful enough to change lives. And then came the most unexpected moment of all. One evening, while I was helping with chores in the kitchen, my aunt's phone rang. It was one of her relatives calling from another city. I overheard her say my name, and then she looked at me with wide eyes. She had just found out about the speech. My uncle stormed into the room moments later, holding his phone, his face red with rage. He shoved it in my face and shouted, "So this is what you've been doing? Talking about us, shamming us in front of the world." My aunt sneered, "You've embarrassed this family forever." For a moment, I thought they might throw me out. My hands shook, but I stood tall. I looked my uncle in the eyes and said words I had never dared to speak before. "You called me a burden. You said my future was a joke. But today, thousands of people know my name, and they know me as a fighter, not a failure. You didn't break me, you built me." The silence that followed was heavier than any insult they had ever thrown at me. My uncle's mouth opened, but no words came out. My aunt looked away, her face pale. In that moment, I realized something powerful. I no longer needed their approval, and I no longer feared their rejection. Their control over me was gone forever. From that day forward, they treated me differently, not with love, not with support, but with silence. And to me, that silence was victory, because silence meant they had no more words to crush me with. As my story continued to spread, I finally felt free. Free to dream, free to speak, free to live without chains. I moved forward, building a platform where my voice reached people across cities and countries, and every time someone commented, "Scarlett, thank you for sharing your story," I remembered the girl sitting in the dark with a broken computer and whispered to her, "We made it." Now, as I look back, I realize my uncle was wrong. My future was not a joke, it was a story. A story of pain, of strength, of fire, and of transformation. And today, as I share it with you, I want you to remember one thing. The people who try to break you are often the ones who fear your light the most. Don't let their darkness define you. Let it fuel you. Because if I, Scarlett Hayes, once called a burden, could rise, then so can you.